Now let's start to warm up the neck joint and muscles by rotating the head in circular directions. For the shoulder, by lifting the shoulder and rotating the shoulder in forward direction and then backward direction. By swinging the arms in circular direction, we loosen the shoulder muscles. To exercise the hip joints and waist, first rotate the hip in circular directions. Then lock the fingers together and swing your upper body from side to side. To warm up the neck muscles and the knees, place the hands on the kneecaps and rotating the knees in circular directions. For the feet joints and ankles, first by pressing the ball of your foot against the ground and then rotate the ankle in circular directions. And now repeat the same exercise to the other leg. To warm up the fingers, by open and close your hand a few times. Now rotate the wrist in circular directions. We'll loosen the wrist joints. To stretch the wrist, by pushing the palms against each other. Then lock the fingers together and push downward with the palms facing down. The sit-up exercise is to tone the stomach muscles and to develop the strength of the waist. And the back curl-up exercise is also to help developing the strength of the waist and the back muscles. The stances or the horses are the most basic and important training in all martial arts. It helps to develop a strong foundation for better balance and add more power to the techniques. The 7 most basic stances are shown here, namely the inward stance, square stance, bow and arrow stance, crane stance, twisting stance, and the back squat stance. The inward stance, square stance, and the bow and arrow stance are used for defending and offending from either front or the side attacks. Cat stance, or sometimes called the pre-fighting stance, require 90% of the weight on the back leg, and with the front leg only touching the ground. The crane stance is usually used for blocking a kick or to avoid a sweep. And the twisting stance allows you to swing your body 180 degrees without changing the position of your feet. And the back squat stance is used for take down the opponents, and the stance requires both feet flat on the ground. In this section, a series of exercises serve to strengthen and conditioning the arms, wrists, and fingers, which are critical for the execution of the Chin-Na techniques. The exercise started with different types of push-up. The first one is a regular push-up with the palm. It's to strengthen the arms. The knuckle push-up is to strengthen and conditioning the striking surface of the fist. The finger push-up is to conditioning and make the fingers more stronger. The next push-up is to strengthen and conditioning the wrist. Beginners should not do this type of push-up unless you have a strong and flexible wrist. And the last one is the forearm push-up. It's helped to develop the strength for the forearm and the wrist. The finger and fist handstands are to strengthen the waist, the stomach, and the leg muscles. This hand exercise are to tense up the fingers from a relaxed position. This type of exercise helps to direct and concentrate the power to the wrist and fingers. The next exercise is to strengthen the arms and the wrist by rolling up weights from a roll bar. Make sure your arms are straight and remain the same height as your shoulders. And the fingers can be strengthened by squeezing a hand grip in different positions. The next exercise is to increase the grabbing power of your hand by grabbing a bag which is filled with BBs or lead shots. When you grab the bag, make sure the palms of your hands are facing down. The last exercise is two-man exercise, which is to increase the grabbing power of your hands by grabbing the forearms back and forth between you and your partner. The Chin-Na techniques are separate into different groups according to the grabs or attacks. The first group of techniques involves a quick release from the grab and return with a simple strike. The first one is the attacker grab your right arm with his left. You quickly draw your arm from the opening of the attacker's hand and followed by a back fist to the face. The second one is the same type of grab. This time you turn your hand in an anti-clockwise direction and followed by a palm strike to the chest. The next one is the attacker grab your right wrist with his right arm. This time you turn your hand in a clockwise direction to break the hold, and the palm strike to the chest. Now so let's look at the first technique again. A simple grab. You just have to draw your arm away from your opponent, and the back fist straight to the side of the head. The next one is to rotate your hand in anti-clockwise direction to break the hold, and the palm straight to the chest or the midsection of the body. The next one is a different grab. The attacker grab your right hand with his right hand. Now you turn your hand in anti-clockwise direction to break the hold, and straight to the flow of the attacker. This is a two-hand grab from the attacker to your forearm with your attacker's left hand on top. Clasp your hands together and pull out from the grab, and the elbow straight to the head. This is the same grab, but this time with the attacker's right hand on top. This is also a pull out from the attacker's grab and elbow straight to the head. The next one, the attacker grab your hand when your hand or your arms are in the upright position. To break the hold, you have to turn your arm in clockwise direction, and then followed by a back fist to the side of the head. This is the same grab as before. This time you push your hand down against the attacker's forearm to break the hold, and then followed by a grab to the attacker's throat. This is a simple grab from behind. The attacker grabs you from behind with his left hand. As soon as the attacker grabs you, you pull your hand out in forward direction and strike him to the neck with the elbow. The next one is a grab from behind. The attacker grabs your shoulders with both hands. Walk a step forward to break the hold and kick to the groin. Now the next group is the grab to the chest. The first one is your attacker grab your chest with his right hand. To break the hold, grab your opponent's thumb and press down. You will put a lot of pressure on his thumb and he had to let go. This is the same grab, a chest grab with the right hand. Now this time, use your left elbow and turn your body sideways and press on the attacker's elbow. This is also a chest grab. And this time, put both hands on top of the attacker's hand and push down. When you're doing this technique, make sure your both hands are pressed down tight and don't let the attacker draw his hand out. The next one is also a chest grab with the right hand. With your left hand holding your opponent's arm and the right hand pressing down to his thumb. The next one is also a chest grab. Now this time, with the right hand holding your opponent's arm and the left hand pushing your opponent's elbow forward and down. Next one is a shoulder grab. Put your right hand on top of your opponent's hand and with the left elbow go around his arm and press down and put pressure on the wrist. This is also a shoulder grab by the opponent with his right hand. This time you grab the index fingers and push forward and down. The next one is your attacker wrap around your shoulder with his left arm. Lock your finger together around his arm and push down, and you will apply a lot of pressure on his shoulder. This is the same grab as before. Now this time you put your right hand up on his chin and with your right leg behind his left leg and take him down. This one is when your attacker rests his arm on your shoulder. Push his arm forward and apply pressure on his wrist by pushing his hand to your body. This is a side shoulder grab from the attacker with his left hand. Your left hand holding the back of your attacker's hand, and with your right hand turning his elbow down by locking his elbow and the wrist. This one is shoulder grab and followed by a punch to your head. You block and grab his fist and turn the arm clockwise and lock both hands together. The next one is the shoulder grab. With your both hand grabbing his arm and turning your body and putting his arm against on your shoulder. The next group of grab is hair grab. Started with a front hair grab by the attacker. With your both hand on top of your attacker's hand and push forward and down to put pressure on his wrist. The next one is also a front hair grab. This time with your right hand, the thumb pressing on the pressure point of the hand, and then turn the attacker's arm around and putting pressure on the wrist. The next one is also a front hair grab. Also with the right hand, the thumb pressing in the cavity point of your opponent's hand, but this time with the left elbow pressing on his elbow, and also both hands are putting pressure on his wrist. The next one is a grab from behind. Now putting both hands against your opponent's hand and turn your body around and pick up your head to put a lot of pressure on his wrist. The next group is the forearm grab or wrist grab. The first one is your attacker grab your wrist with his right hand. Put your left hand on top of his hand and with your right hand turning in clockwise position and locking his wrist. The second one is also a wrist grab. This time turning his arm anti-clockwise and put your elbows against his and push upward to apply pressure on both the wrist and the elbow. This one is also the same grab, a forearm grab. And this time you're pulling his arm and turning in clockwise direction, locking his shoulder. This one is also a hand grab. With your right hand, push again on your attacker's hand and push upward to apply pressure on his wrist. This is also a wrist grab with the attacker's left arm. By grabbing his hand and the arm and turning your body and putting his arm against your elbow or shoulder to apply pressure. The next one is a reverse wrist grab or forearm grab. By applying pressure with your elbow to your attacker's wrist. This is also a forearm grab. With your left hand turning up and the right hand grab your attacker's wrist and twist on his arm. This one is also a reverse wrist grab. Grab your opponent's arm and turn it over your body and putting pressure on the wrist. This is a two-hand grab for the forearm with the attacker's left hand on top. Put your right hand rotate in clockwise direction against your attacker's forearms and locking on his wrist. This is the same grab. Both hand grab to the forearm with the left on top. Now this time with the left hand, take your attacker's left arm and put it on top of his elbow and lock it. This one is also a two-arm grab. You're locking your opponent's wrist by turning your right arm against his wrist. This is a two-hand grab, your two hand. The right hand grab your opponent's hand and the other pull in the elbow. This is another two-hand grab. First break the hold on the right arm and then strike to your opponent's elbow and lock his arm by pushing his arm forward and down. The next one is a simple wrist grab. You put your left forearm on his inner elbow and push forward and down. This one is the upper arm grab. With your left hand on top of his hand to secure the hold, and with your forearm turning counterclockwise to put pressure on his forearm and wrist. This is another forearm grab. This time with your left arm turning in clockwise direction and apply pressure on the wrist. This is also a forearm grab, but this time with the attacker's right hand. Hold the attacker's hand with your left and then turn your right arm clockwise and grab to the elbow. This is a grab on your wrist when your wrist is on upright position. Hold the attacker's arm and turn it sideways and apply pressure on the wrist. The next group of grab or attack is the punch. The attacker initiates with the forward punch to the head, block with the left arm, and with the right hand grab to the throat and take him down to the floor. And the second one is also a punch to the head. Block with the right and grab, and then with the left arm grab the attacker's shoulder and turn his arm over. The next one is a forward punch to the midsection. Block with the right arm and the left hand grab his hand, and with the right arm turn in a clockwise direction, locking the wrist and the elbow. The next one is a forward punch to the head. Block with the left arm. At the same time, grab your opponent's arm and rotate your body and put his arm on your shoulder. The next one is a reverse punch to the midsection. Block and turn his arm over with the right hand grabbing the shoulder's muscle. The next group of attack is a neck choke. With your fingers, both hands digging into his collarbone to put a lot of pain on his collarbone. This is an attack from the back with the attacker's right hand on your mouth. All those techniques can be used with the other hand, the left or the right. This is a full Nelson grab from behind. First step on his leg and with a headbutt to his face and a kick to the groin. This is a forearm neck choke from behind. First strike him with the elbow and with the left arm around his right arm and locking on his shoulder. The next group is a grab to the waist. When the attacker grabs your waist on the side, and all you have to do is wrap the left arm against his and knock both hands and push down on his elbow. This is front wrist grab to the waist. With the left hand holding his arm and the right arm apply pressure on the attacker's elbow. This is a front grab from behind. The attacker wraps his arm around you from the front. With your both hands push his hip and then the knee kick to his groin. This is another grab from behind. First, you put your both arms to break the hold and grab his front leg and take him down and step to his groin. This is a front grab on your waist. This time clap to his head and poke the ear and rotate his head. The next one is the waist lock from behind. First you have to pull in the wrist of his right hand to put pressure on the wrist to break the lock, and turn around and put in pressure or break his wrist. This is a waist lock from behind. First, strike your attacker with the elbow, and then wrap your right arm around his neck. Next one is against a front kick. By catching the kick and apply pressure on his ankle. The next one is against a side kick. Block with your left arm and turn his leg around, putting pressure on his leg. This group is a handshake. The first one is to use your thumb and press on the pressure point between the thumb and the index fingers of the opponents. This is another handshake. This time, grab the thumb and pull down. This way you will apply a lot of pressure to the thumb. And the next one is also a handshake. By turning his hand upward and pull. The next two techniques are when you're sitting down and you're attacked by someone. There are two techniques are shown here when you're sitting down with your legs in different position. The next group of techniques are against weapons. The first one is against a knife, pointing to your chin. With your left arm, pull the knife away from you and a knee strike to the groin. The next one is knife pointing to your chest. This time, pull the knife away with your right hand and a knee kick to the groin. This technique is against knife. Step to you forward by crossing your arm to block and turn your arm clockwise and lock the wrist. This is another technique to against a knife to step to you. Block and grab the arm with your left and elbow straight to the head. The next one is to against a pole, striking down. First block with the left and then grab your opponent's leading arm and wrap around the pole. The last group of techniques are ground techniques. When you are on the ground and your opponent or the attacker are on top of you, and with both hands choking your neck, first You apply pressure on his elbow, and with the right knee, push him to the side. The next one is the same grab, same ground position, and this time you apply pressure on your opponent's elbow. The grabs. The first group is the chest grab. The attacker grab your chest with his right hand. With your right thumb, press into the cavity point of your attacker's hand and turn it into a clockwise direction and apply pressure on his wrist. The second one is also a chest grab, and this time you're also locking the attacker's wrist, but this time you're turning into opposite direction as the first one. The next one is also a chest grab, and now you wrap your left arm around your opponent's right arm and push down on his elbow and the shoulder. The next one is a double hand chest grab, with your both hand holding the attacker's arm and turn it and lock his both hands. This is another single chest grab. This time with your right hand with the thumb pressing in to the inner elbow of the opponent. There's a cavity points over there which will create a lot of pain on the arm. The next one is a shoulder grab followed by a punch to the head. You block with your right arm and turn it clockwise and lock both of your opponent's hand or arm. The next one is a grab from behind. With your left hand put on top of your opponent's hand and lock the position, and with your right elbow pressing down, apply pressure on the wrist. This is a shoulder grab from behind. With your left hand putting on top of the attacker's hand and your right arm wrap around the attacker's arm and apply pressure on the elbow and the shoulder. This is the same grab as before, this time with the right hand grabbing the shoulder muscle. Now we move to another group, which is hair grab. The first one is hair grab from the front. With your left hand fingers digging into the cavity point between the thumb and the index finger, and the next one is hair grab from behind. With your left hand, secure his hand on your head and turn your body around with the right elbow pressing down on his forearm and elbow. This one is a forearm grab or a wrist grab. The attacker grab your right arm with his left. With your right hand turning in anti-clockwise direction and holding your opponent's forearm and apply pressure on his wrist. The next grab is also a wrist grab with the attacker's right arm grabbing your left arm. This is a two-hand grab. First, put the attacker's left arm on his own inner elbow and press forward and downward to create pressure on his elbow. This is also a forearm grab. With the right hand, wrap around the attacker's arm, and the right hand also grabbing the shoulder muscle. This is a two-hand grab, the forearm, with the attacker's left hand on top. When you practice this technique with your partner, you be very careful when you're applying pressure on the joints. The next one is two-hand grab from behind. The attacker grab both of your arms from behind, and you turn around and holding his both hand and locking his both arm at the elbow joint. This is another double hand grab on the forearm. This is another technique that locking the attacker's both arm at the elbow joint. This is also a two-hand forearm grab, this time with your right hand turning clockwise and putting pressure on the attacker's wrist. This is a reverse wrist grab. Grab your opponent's hand and turn it over your body by twisting his arm. The next one is upper arm grab. You put a lot of pressure on your opponents by wrapping your right arms around his left arm. This is another forearm grab by both of the attacker's hands. By putting your forearm on top of your opponent's palm and putting pressure on his wrist. The next group is against punches. The first one is against two punches, one on the top and one on the midsection. One follow each other. Block the first one with your right and then catch the left one. The next one is against a reverse punch to the face. Block the punch with your left arm and with your left finger hooking into the collarbone. The next one is also against a reverse punch to the head. Block with the right and go around to your opponent's back with your left hand. Pull his head to the side at the chin. This is another technique to against a punch. This time you take your opponent down by pushing his chin and also with the right leg sweeping his legs. The next group of techniques against the neck choke. The first one, your attacker choking your neck with his both hands. With your two forearms, applying pressure on your opponent's elbows, and also the knee was pressing down against his. You're applying pressure on both his hand and the leg. The next one is the full Nelson lock. First you have to do is step on his feet to break the lock, and elbow straight to the stomach, and then to the groin and to the head. That's another full Nelson lock from behind. This time you place your right leg behind your opponent and with the elbow striking to his chest and take him down. Now we move to another group. This one is a waist lock from behind. First, with the right elbow straight to the neck, and then grab the attacker's right arm and take him down and lock the elbow. This one is a headlock. Grab the attacker's hair with your right and then step on his knee, and then with both hands turning his head. The next one is two-hand raise grab. This is another technique that grabbing the muscle on the shoulder that will create a lot of pain. The next one is a raise grab from the front. With both hands grabbing the attacker's forearm and push it down, and also place your leg against his shoulder. The next one is a front bear hug. First, push the hip of the attacker to break the hold, and with your two arms wrap around his and putting a lot of pressure on his elbow. The next one is against a side kick by locking the ankle. Here to show you feel of the pressure point on the arm. When you practice this, you have to get the position correctly by placing your thumb on those positions and see your opponent feel the pain. You have to be very precise to have those techniques to be effective. The next technique is initiated with a handshake. By locking your opponent's wrist. By wrapping your left arm against his right arm. The next one is a neck choke from behind. With the left finger pressing on one of the pressure points on your attacker's arm and placing his arm on top of your shoulder to break his shoulder or elbow. Now let's move to the weapons. The first technique against a short pole or a stick. By blocking with your left arm and wrap your right arm behind the attacker's right arm and lock him at the elbow. next one is to against a knife attack pointing at the chin. With your left hand pulling the knife against from you, and with the knee straight to the groin. This is also a technique to against the knife pointing at your chin. By placing the attacker's arm that holding the knife on his elbow and with a kick to the groin. The next technique is against a stabbing to the chest with a knife. Parry with the left and then wrap your right arm against the attackers and with the 3 fingers hook to the floor. And also you apply pressure on the elbow too. This is a similar technique to the one that we've seen before, but this time you wrap your left arm around and pull his hair. This is a different technique that against a knife attack. Block with the right arm and grab the attacker's forearm and place the knife towards him and followed by a knee strike to the head. The next one is against a handgun pointing at your head. When you're doing those techniques, you have to react very fast by pulling the gun that pointed at your head away from you and with the knee strike to the groin. This is another technique against a handgun pointing at your head. This time is pointed from the side of your head. With your both hand up and grab the hand of the attacker that holding the gun and bend his hand towards him. This is a technique against a handgun pointing from behind. Turn around quickly with the left hand locking the attacker's right arm and the right elbow to the face. The next one is against a pole that's striking downward to you. Block with the left. With the right hand, grab the leading arm and wrap his arm around the pole. And this one is against a spear. Blocking with the right arm and turn your body around and wrap the arm against the opponent's leading arm and putting pressure on the elbow and also with the left knee. In this section, some of the most common anti-China techniques are shown here. In martial arts, every punch can be blocked and every technique can be countered, and there's no exception in the China. China technique can be countered before it becomes a deadlock. A deadlock means you cannot move or bend your wrist, your elbow, or move any part of your body to a more favorable condition to counter the technique. The first technique is you initiate it with a chest grab and your opponent try to put an elbow lock on you. And before it becomes a deadlock, you bend the elbow and pull your elbow out, and with your both hands grab your opponent's hands and knock his arm against your body. The next one is you try to grab your opponent on the shoulder, and your opponent put a wrist lock on your right hand by pressing his elbow down on your forearm. Now bend the elbow and turn your body around and behind him and wrap your left forearm around your opponent's neck and pull up and try to break the neck bone of your opponent. For doing the China or anti-China technique effectively, you must have a good speed and a strong wrist and arm. Next one is you try to punch the head of your opponent, and your opponent grab your forearm and put an elbow lock on you. As your opponent push your arm downward, at this time, you can slide your two legs in between his left leg and turn around and lock his leg at the knee. next one is you grab the opponent's right arm with your right hand, and your opponent put a wrist lock on your arm. Now you have to bend your right elbow and step forward and put your left hand in and push his wrist forward and down. This is a similar technique to the first one that we've seen. The opponent put a wrist lock on your arm and you bend the elbow, and this time you put the hand on top of your opponent's hand, and with the right arm and the elbow pressing down and apply pressure on the wrist and the arm of your opponent. This is another technique to against a wrist lock from your opponent. And here you have also to bend the elbow, and with the left hand placed on your opponent's elbow and turn it around and put an elbow lock on him. This one started with a reverse hand grip, and your opponent putting a wrist lock on your left arm by placing his arm on top of your elbow. You will take one step forward and turn your body around with your right hand grabbing the opponent's throat to break his hold. The next one is started with a handshake, and your opponent putting a thumb press on you with his both hand pressing your thumb down. counter this technique, put your left hand on top of his right arm and use the elbow pushing upward to apply pressure both on the wrist and on the elbow. The next technique is to counter an elbow lock from your opponent. At this position, you take a step forward and place your left hand on his elbow, and with the right hand grabbing his arm and pressing forward and downward to apply pressure on his elbow. The next one is a counter technique to an elbow lock. Your opponent putting an elbow lock by wrapping his left arm around yours and pushing upward. Bend the elbow and step to the behind of your opponent and grab your opponent's chin and turn his head to the side. At the same time, with the right hand grabbing your opponent's right arm against to your body and putting pressure on his elbow. The next technique is to against a headlock from your opponent. At this position, pull the right arm out from the grab of your opponent and putting an elbow lock on his left arm. Speed and timing is important in the counter or anti-China techniques. The following one is to against an arm lock from the opponent. Your opponent put the arm lock by wrapping his arms around your right arm. Now you, with your left arm pushing the upper arm of the opponent, at the same time with your right hand pulling the other arm toward you. next one, your opponent putting an elbow or shoulder lock on your right arm. And before your opponent putting pressure on your elbow or the shoulder, you have to bend and turn your elbow against his head and press down. The next technique is your opponent putting an arm lock on your right arm. At this position, with your left hand, go around and lock the fingers together and pulling his arm in the opposite direction by locking his arm. When you practice those anti-China techniques with your opponent or your partner, you be very careful, because any mistake you can be broken your partner's arm, wrist or elbow very easily. In this technique, you grab the opponent's hair and your opponent's putting a wrist lock on your left wrist. At this position, with your right hand grabbing your opponent's right hand and turn his arm in a clockwise direction and lock the wrist. As you put a bear hug on your opponent and your opponent try to twist your head, and right at the moment when he's starting doing that, you have to release the hold and grabbing his left arm at the elbow and turn your arm and push downward and make sure your right arm is on top of his elbow. next one is your opponent try to take you down by sweeping your right leg and putting his left arm under your chin. Right at this moment, you have to grab both your opponent's arm and flip it over to the front. The next one is your opponent putting an arm lock on your right arm by wrapping his arm around your arm. With your left hand placing on his elbow and turn his arm around and press down at the same time with the left knee pressing down to lock his right knee. In this position, you have total control of your opponent. And the next one is your opponent putting an arm lock, and he managed to get behind you. At this moment, move your stance and with your left leg behind your opponent's leg and your left arm around his body. And apply pressure on his waist. Or you can take him down on this position. As you grab your opponent's upper arm with your left hand, your opponent put a wrist lock on your arm. At this point, your right hand grab his right arm and with the left elbow turning in clockwise direction and putting pressure on his elbow. The next one is you grab your opponent from behind and your opponent turn around and putting a wrist lock on you. At this position, turn your body counterclockwise, and with your left fingers grabbing the throat of your opponent to break the hold. The following is a set of two-man Chin-Na set, which contain a sequence of Chin-Na and counter Chin-Na techniques, which you can practice with your partner. When you practice this Chin-Na set with your partner, be very careful and make sure you know how much pressure to put on without injuring your partner. This two-man set contains a lot of different locking techniques which can be countered. And the Chin-Na can be translated roughly into English as grabbing and control your opponent. And the Chin-Na technique not only contain grabbing and locking, and also it contains a lot of kicking, striking to the pressure point of the body. In the slow motion here, you can see the technique a little bit more clear. And also, this two-man set will be demonstrated in other angles, so you can pick up those techniques which you cannot see it very clearly in here. Now let's look at the two-man set in another angle. When you practice the Chin-Na techniques, not only the hand techniques are important, also the stances. You have to pay attention on that too. A strong stance will give you a more firm foundation and will make you to execute the Chin-Na technique more effectively.